I would like to first extend my thank you to the lands of Eskimo and Songhees for welcoming us in this beautiful journey of education. Well, the world is now interconnected and people from diverse backgrounds are coming together to work. And in this, we need leader who is well adapted to the current situation. If we refer to an article by Manikutty, in which he explains that leadership is no more about authoritarian, and neither can the readers rely on the previous experiences, and nor they can actually go ahead and ask for the information that they have, which is way too much for them. Today's leadership requires one to become egalitarian, which is the Western culture, and it also requires a leader to adapt various situations which is coming across to them. Hello everyone, my name is Rahul Vishwakarma. I hail from the beautiful city of Bombay. I'm an IT engineer with 10 years of experience, and in my speech, I'll talk about the strengths that I possess. I'll talk about the stretches which I want to work on as being a leader. I'd like to talk about the goals that I have set for myself and the outcomes that I'm expecting out of it. And I would also want to touch base on the intercompetencies that we have to build on. Thank you. I'd like to talk about the strengths that one possesses as being a leader. Why is it important for someone to have strength, and where can we implement it? I would like to call myself lucky enough to be educated and brought up in a very nice family. I've got this opportunity. By this, I have learned a lot of things in myself. But on this particular occasion, I'd like to highlight two of my strengths. One is relationship building, and the other one is influencing. Since childhood, I have this notion that I actually like helping people. I try to understand people, their psychology, and I try to connect with them on an emotional level as well. Whether it is my personal or professional level, I always try to make sure that I'm connected with the person to the core so that I can understand the person and the person can understand me as well. I have applied this in my professional life before as well. And to back it up with my self-assessment, I actually scored the highest in my pursuing skills for the emotional intelligence as well. The score was about 5, but I would still like to dedicate this as one of my strengths. What happened is that in my previous organization, while I was working into one of the projects back in Singapore, we had multiple people who were from diverse backgrounds. So what was happening is that there is an inevitability of conflict that will arise between them. Many of them, they had this particular thinking that since they belong to a different location or different area locality in which they are not able to accept the fact that they might have to work for a certain different time zone, whilst the other who had the ability of doing the same thing, but they weren't good enough in order to communicate the same to the people. And there was this conflict which was coming. I was very good with them in terms of communicating one-on-one. My relationship with them from day one was very good in terms of communicating the project requirements as well as understanding their individual needs as well. I had a word with each one of them. I tried to sit with them multiple times to understand what kind of challenges they are encountering, upon which we were able to come to a common platform where people were able to communicate with each other and the issue was resolved. I'd like to talk about one more influencing skill that I have, and I want to bring a direct quote here. This is by Rick Gibbs of Forbes. It states that the ability to influence is an interpersonal skill that is often overlooked. And I believe it is truly said as well. Today's modern day leaders, they require some amount of agility, critical thinking, and teamwork as well. And all of these are actually part of being influential as well. I think I'm a pretty good influencer in terms of talking to people, communicating with my peers as well, and making sure that the work that we require is getting done with their availability and with their complete dedication as well. There was one of the projects in which we required to work a little more than whatever stipulated time we had. And it's quite obvious people were getting a little bit of off with this part. But what happened is that I was able to communicate to them that this is well worth their time. And I had an influence in front of them that I, being a leader, trying to manage a team, I was also dedicating my time as well. This worked well for us. People were there and they said, okay, we would like to work an extra. It is definitely worthy. But more than we are pretty happy about the fact that you are coming and communicating this to us very directly in the way we want to listen to it. And hence I want to highlight once again relationship development and influencing are my strength. And these are some that a leader would definitely have. Thank you. Why is it important for a leader to understand their underdeveloped area? It is something which is required for a person to grow on a professional as well as on a personal level, and most importantly on an organizational level as well. I'd like to bring in two underdeveloped area in me, which I want to increase with the help of the learning from this course and the peers as well. One of them is decision making, and the other is adaptive leadership. I want to talk about the latter one first because this actually has a very big resemblance to one of my work which I did, which is slightly related to my projects, which I thought could have been even done in a better way. But before that, I want to highlight that with the help of a direct quote. In an article that is Leadership and Permanent Crisis, Zender highlighted a part: stability is a liability, not an asset in today's world. And I want to relate to it is because most of the times what we happen to do is that we get into a comfort zone and we think that the things have already been done and we might not have to work beyond this. But this is where we actually go wrong. What happened in that one of the projects while I was working back in Singapore, in one of the banks we had to automate a particular software. And I was a manual software tester. I didn't know anything about automation as well. And this is something that came and hit me in my performance as well, because the client wanted the particular software to be delivered at a stipulated amount of time. But what I was able to do at that point of time is that I was able to adapt to the requirement. I was able to learn the automational script and I was able to put that to work as well. Although I got through it, but it is something I would want to say that it wasn't easy. And this is what adaptive leadership demands. There was one more incident with adaptive leadership in which a project that we were working in, the client wanted with a particular software to be delivered in 3 months of time. We had sufficient time and our work was getting good as well. But all of a sudden, probably around 3 or 4 weeks before, he actually came up and said that he wants the software right away, and which was not the right thing because the testing wasn't done. Although we were on at our pace, but the requirement of the clients changed because of the competition growing in the market, which led us to adapt the situation, work on it and deliver the product to the client. However, the testing of the product was not done properly and the client did face some sort of defects in the production as well. This is where I want to say that adaptive leadership can actually change a lot in me and myself as well. There's one more thing I want to highlight with respect to decision making is that my decision making abilities, I have tested it on a self-assessment. It has although come at as a very good score of 4.96. However, I would want to say that this is something that I would want to still go ahead, nurture in myself, because it is a basic requirement any of the leader for the organizational purposes as well. In one of the decision making things that I had to take from my previous organizations, in which I have to tell the employees that there are certain amount of test cases we need to add to the project. And for which we had to communicate this to the client, for which the business requirement documentation had to be updated. I was in very good terms with the client. We had a very good communication. And I told them, okay, this is something that I can do for you. The client also agreed for it. However, we didn't put that into the BRD, that is the business requirement document. And what happened eventually after 1 month is that the client left for another project in his division. And while we were working on this project itself, we were able to deliver it to them. The person who replaced him as our client did not accept this requirement. And this is where we failed as making a decision because the probabilities of this event happening was lesser to us. Although we didn't say it, but we should have been more careful in noting down the requirements. Until this date, I'm slightly regretful of this fact that is there something that I could have done a little better. That is one of the reasons I want to improve my decision making ability as well. Thank you. It is utmost important for a leader to set up realistic goals. What it does is that it helps the people to come to a common platform and work towards a common objective as well. I'd like to emphasize this point with 3 techniques, or probably call it as practices. Hershey's and Blanchard's situational theory of leadership, in which it's been very, very influentially mentioned about the coaching and listening part. Although the scales of high and low would be different, but the directiveness and supportiveness is something that I believe a leader should possess. The other part that I want to emphasize is the adaptive leadership techniques or the practices that we can learn and try to implement in our life. In the example in which Julie, who was working with Best Buy, she explained, I would say demonstrated about fostering adaptation. And I would want to learn this particular skill in myself as well, to learn something while doing and getting to it and implementing it as well. The other facet that I want to talk about is understanding as how leadership could be by generate leadership with the people who are working with me and the ones who are working under me as well. It's not necessarily that as a leader you can make all the right decisions. You would need someone who can think beyond you probably as being a leader, although working at a different level. The third part that I want to understand and explain here is that embrace disequilibrium. As in the case of Paul Levy, in the organization which he was working, he brought up such measures which was not taken well with the people out there. But then he was pretty adamant that this can actually work for them, and it did work for them. These are three things which I want to talk about adaptive leadership. The other part that I want to emphasize, this will help me in terms of my decision making as well. But before that, I want to introduce a direct quote. This is by Susan David and Christina Congleton, and they stated, this was in a research by the way, they stated that ample research shows that attempting to minimize or ignore thoughts and emotions serves only to amplify them. And you know what, this actually stuck to my mind. Because of a regretful decision that I made earlier in my career, it has often come to me, although I've tried pushing it back, but it's still come to me once again and again and again. And I was not able to focus onto my works most of the time, thinking that what different I could have done in order to change my decision making. For which, in the article that is mentioned by Susan, I would like to practice, there are 4 things that I would like to practice and try to understand as how I can embrace the part. The very first thing is that I want to understand how we make decisions, probably recognize the patterns, label the thoughts that are coming into my mind, accept them, and still act on my values. I still till date regret on the part that I communicated to the client and the people that I was working with particular software that I have to deliver, although the client got replaced, which I talked about earlier. But my decision was completely right. But still I feel it from the employee's perspective who put on their hard work. But if I'm still getting into this loophole, if I'm getting this thing coming back to me again, then I probably might not be able to take this decision again in my life. Although that could be the right practice. This is what I'm trying to understand, is that if I embrace this, if I accept this and still try to act on the value that is serving the client's need, I think I might actually do good later on in my life as well. Thank you. It is often harsh to say that the goals were not achieved and it was not delivered, and overlooking the efforts that people put for in order to achieve the goal. But then that's the nature of the outcome. We set up the goals in order to go ahead and achieve the practical outcomes that is set by the SMART criteria that we can do. And I have already set up such goals with the help of SMART criteria as well. But before speaking about the outcome, I want to bring in, probably emphasize one of the points by Brené Brown, a TED speaker, in her speech of the power of vulnerability. When she talks about that vulnerability actually leads us to one of the positions which is slightly difficult for us to embrace. But then it also gives us a very good feeling that we can get a sense of joy because we can be more creative in such situations. And this is something that I would encourage a leader to embrace in themselves. We can inculcate such things, get such exposures, see ourselves with the self-awareness, self-exploration, so that it can help us to achieve the outcomes. The part that I want to emphasize in the outcome that I'm expecting myself is in terms of the speedy delivery of any of the services or products that I would take or maybe probably wish for the future as well, and neglect, or rather work on the neglected errors or the mistaken areas as well. The other outcome that I'm expecting with the help of good decision making is to save time, money, and the resources for the organization's perspective as well. Coming down to the adaptive leadership, I want to ensure that I work on and build and nurture upon on my higher EQ level in order to understand the person on the emotional level as well. Right till the core as how I will be able to relate or understand myself to that person, and a symbiotic process amongst that person in order to achieve the common goals as well. There's one more part I want to emphasize, and that is on the focusing of diversities. I'm pretty good with people. I understand that relationship development has been a very good aspect in me. And I want to understand that working with diversities, there are certain that conflicts would arrive. But then the outcome that I'm expecting here is that I should be able to understand these facets and be the first person who should be able to go and address it. The other part that I want to work on and make sure that this is coming as a very good outcome is that I want to encourage people to think like a leader, to make sure that their strengths are actually getting utilized. More often than not, we are not being able to inspire people and utilize their strength to the best we can. And the very important thing that I want to emphasize as being a leader and the outcome that I'm expecting is the expectation of change. In this ever-growing competitive world, the change is there. It is imminent. It will happen. And we as adaptive leader have to ensure that we are seeing the future or maybe foreseeing the possibilities by making good decisions as well, so that we can address the change wherever it is needed. Thank you. A leader is no more representing his or her organization on a national or a regional level anymore. A leader is rather representing his or her organization on a global platform now. And this requires leaders to understand certain traits which is expected out of them. Amongst these, the top 5 rated ones are the honesty, the forward-looking, competency, intelligence, and inspiring as well. But what I have learned from the course is that we also have to value the higher EQ level in a leader as well. A leader has to understand that he or she has to go through a self-exploration and self-awareness pattern to understand what is actually requirement in the organization level as well. A leader has to understand the stretches that he or she would like to improve, because these are certain areas which will help them and the organization grow as well. There is a certain amount of doubt we definitely come into, but this can actually help us by laying a certain goals for us, by applying the SMART criteria. A leader should be able to reflect onto the goals and work onto the outcome that they want to achieve by being very practical towards it. And there is a thought I want to introduce in that part, that is by Simon Sinek in his TED Talk. He emphasizes on the fact that people would want to work for a company which values them. And basically we should count more hearts than the numbers. And on my personal experience, I would want to emphasize one point here is that a leader should be able to see both sides of the stories and not restrict himself to one single side of the story. Thank you everyone. You've been a wonderful audience.